Next, a very familiar march, but not one that was written by Sousa, although most people think it was. This is written by a New England bandsman named E.E. Bagley. This is called National Emblem. Now, those of you who are used to hearing marches are used to hearing at the end of a march, you hear that. It's called the stinger. You'll be waiting a long time for the stinger on this one because there isn't one. guess I am a teacher because we're going to learn a little bit of musical history here. A very important instrument in the 17th and 18th century, which of course is before we were a country, was the fife. The fife was a six-toed instrument, usually made out of wood, and it was used very prominently in battle and by the armies because it had a very penetrating pitch. And out of that, a lot of music has been rediscovered, recaptured, featuring the fife because of its historical significance. The closest instrument we have to the fife is the piccolo. Hold it up, Judy. Yep. That's the piccolo. Judy has the easiest job. She's got the lightest instrument to carry to each performance. The tuba player won't carry it for her. And she's going to play for you 3 fife tunes, none of which are American. Actually, the first one is called the General Wolfe's March. General Wolfe was the English general who actually made sure that most of Canada spoke English and not French, although he was killed at the end of the Battle of Montreal. The Bedfordshire March was a British march from 1770. The final one is called Asa Ira, which is a French which means it will be fine. French, I guess, had that kind of laid-back attitude even towards work. Judy? Judy Zimmerman is our fifer tonight. Next we have some music that was written in a previous century. The last one. This music was actually written in 1982, and it was written as a fiddle tune, as basically a song of lament as people left a camp in upstate New York where they learned fiddling. But the piece is so evocative that when Ken Burns, the filmmaker who did the Civil War series, heard it, he decided to use it as one of the main themes in the Civil War television show. So those of you who watch that would be familiar with this piece, which is called Shokin Farewell. We're going to conclude this segment of our program with a song that is so familiar that it's in most hymn books celebrating our country. I'm fortunate to have a co-director with me, Mr. Joe Forziati, and he will direct us in America the Beautiful.
everybody having a good time? You enjoying the music? Is this one heck of a band? They are fabulous, aren't they? I have a special connection. My name's Ed Komchuk, as you well know from the program. I am Vice Chairman of the Environmental Commission. I'm a good old boy here from West Deptford. I've lived my whole life here. I was born in Woodbury 87 years ago, and I've spent the rest of my time here in West Deptford. And I am going to be, much to your relief, the last teacher you have to listen to tonight. But I am going to I'm going to get in trouble with some past students of mine and a good friend of mine, because I have such a good connection with this band. There are 3 gentlemen here I'm going to ask to stand up and be recognized. 2 of them are my former students. They were calculus students. They are now engineers and computer scientists, and they both got A's in calculus class. And the other, that's true, and the other is one of my very, very special friends. He's very smarter than he looks, much smarter than he looks, Don Evans, and he was a scientist with the Environmental Protection Agency in Philadelphia. And the people I would like to, the gentlemen that I would like, please stand up and be recognized, are Don Evans on trumpet, trombone rather. He plays 10 different instruments, that's why I got confused. I would like Bob Cicero, who is alto sax. And I would like Kurt Weller on the French horn. See, your old teacher can still get ahead of you, right? Okay, thank you very much. I keep threatening, I want to join this band, but they won't let accordion players do it. So that's my instrument. Okay, let's get on with the last lesson of the night. I've been a teacher of mathematics for 33 years. My first year was spent here in West Deptford, as a matter of fact, when it was a junior-senior high school. Every first-year teacher knows this, that you got to find out where your students are so that you can start from that point on. Tonight, I view you as my students because I'm aware that many people in West Deptford are not aware of their local history. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to need a show of hands every once in a while to find out what you know and what you don't know. So if you'll cooperate with me, please. Who knows where Billingsport is? Yes, you know it's a section of Paulsboro. And back in colonial times, it was its own little town, but it eventually got incorporated into Paulsboro. And how many of you know the significance of it in our history? Some do, yes. Some of you may have taken part last weekend in the celebration that Paulsboro had for the Billingsport fort that was built there. That was one of the first forts ever built, and that land still exists thanks to the people of Paulsboro who preserved it all these years. And that fort also, as Eric mentioned, was designed by the Polish engineer. I think he's my cousin, maybe, right? Thaddeus Kosciuszko, and he also was the designer of the fort at Fort Mercer. So, okay, so now you know where we're going to be starting our story. 96 acres were purchased back in those days from the farmers there, the Paul family. And purpose was created to create a fort to protect Philadelphia from the British ships coming up. How many people know where Berkeley Road is? Yes, it's the road that comes out of Paulsboro towards Mount Royal, right? You're going to need to know that for what I'm going to say. Everybody know the Mount Royal Inn? Some of you go there for a drink, right? 1762 it was built, but it was built not as a saloon at that time or an inn. It was actually a hospital. And everybody knows Kings Highway, right? The road that goes from, let's say, Mount Royal all the way into Woodbury. That was like a military road back in those days. How many people are familiar with the John Cooper House in Woodbury? It's not there anymore, so you may not be familiar with it. Do you ever remember that it was there at one time? John Cooper was a patriot, a wealthy man, and his home was used, as we'll talk about later. And everyone knows where the Friends Meeting House is in Woodbury? Right, okay. So now we can go along with the story. As you know, the Battle of Red Bank took place October 22nd, 1777. And the problem was that the British had was, as Eric mentioned, they were embarrassed by the defeat that they experienced there, simply by a relative handful of patriots against 2,000 Hessians. So the British wanted to avenge their loss, and they tried to do something about it. And started it all with General Cornwallis. He crossed the Delaware from Pennsylvania, and he landed his troops on the Fort Billingsport. He brought across anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 troops. It depends on what you read. Some people will even say there were 7,000 troops that were brought across. They started right there in Billingsport, basically Paulsboro now. They marched those troops out of Berkeley Road. Imagine that, some of you have driven on that. And they kept marching east until they got to a place called Sandtown. Anybody know what Sandtown is? That was the original name of Mount Royal. It was called Sandtown. And they came right to where the tavern is now, but it was the hospital at the time. And they intersected King's Highway. And they then, remember, they made that whole march up there. Nobody bothered them. It was like in November. It was probably a nice fall afternoon. They were on maybe a hike, they thought. They turned north on the King's Highway at the intersection of Berkeley and King's Highway, and they came to, of all places, the Mantua Creek. There was a bridge at the time, but the locals and the local militia had disassembled that bridge, and so they had to restore it. This is the first time in their march, remember they're trying to get to Woodbury, it's the first time in their march that they've met with any type of resistance. That resistance came from the people here in West Deptford. Now, it may have been in the form of civilians, and it may have been in the form of militia, the Gloucester County militia. And as they were trying to rebuild the bridge, a group of militia people in the area of what is now Colonial Pipeline's tank farm, you're familiar where that is, right by the creek there and King's Highway. They started rebuilding the bridge, and our people started bombarding them with small arms fire, basically. And the main objective was really to delay the British as long as they could. And so the British, we were looking at this like, fleas on an elephant. They decided they're not going to put up with this sort of thing. Instead, they bring out their cannons, and they start bombarding all that area there along Hillside Road and Riverside Road there, and along the tank farm area with cannons and other armament. And some people describe that as a scrimmage. I call it the Battle of the Bridge. And if you think there's a difference between a scrimmage and a battle, let me show you something. If you are in the area and you got things this big flying past your head, what do you think you're in, a battle or a scrimmage? I'm going to think I'm in a battle. This piece of armament is a British cannonball from that area that was just discovered a few months ago by my neighbor, Marcia Lindsay, in her yard. She was gardening, another retired teacher. She was gardening, and she came across this lump in her garden, and lo and behold, it was that cannonball. So, how many people have ever heard of a witness tree? Okay, another little bit of education. Witness trees are found most of the time in very historic spots. If you go to Gettysburg, there are certain trees that are designated witness trees. That means they were very young and at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now they're older, elderly trees. Well, we have several of those witness trees along the Mantua Creek in the West Deptford section. And one of those trees saw this cannonball go past it. And there's more than one on that road. So, the British eventually pushed our people away and they rebuilt the bridge. And they then started their march on towards Woodbury. Now, one of the things I noticed that people that don't know the history of this area is many times you're in a very historic place and you don't realize it. How many people here live close by Kings Highway, the part that runs between the two towns? I travel that road quite often, and every time I travel it, my imagination starts working on me. You have to remember, 249 years ago, there were the parts of the world's most formidable army, the strongest army the world knew at the time, were marching right through the center of West Deptford, and that's our connection there. We were the first to put some pressure on the British from trying to get in here, and then eventually when the British did, they came up the backbone of West Deptford, because that's high ground all the way into Woodbury. And so I just imagine that every time I'm driving, that same road that I'm driving on now was once being marched on by soldiers from the most powerful army in the world at the time. The British finally came in to Woodbury, they captured it. Their main goal was they wanted to use that as a base to get back to try to capture the fort, Fort Mifflin, or Fort Mercer rather. What they were not aware of, and what was fortuitous for us, was we realized that we could not hold off 4,000 British regulars. And we were very fortunate to be able to handle the Hessians. So we had to make a decision. And the decision was, about a month later from the battle, we actually decided to abandon the fort. We never lost the fort, we abandoned it. We blew up all of the armament there, and the reports say that the sound and shaking was felt for miles around, so that when the British finally got there, there was no fort for them to have. So they stayed for a while, and eventually they left the area and went up towards Gloucester area. Now, what did they do in Woodbury? Well, the first thing they did is what most armies do when the officers come into a town. They get a headquarters, and what do they look for? They look for the most luxurious house. And the most luxurious house in Woodbury at that time was John Cooper's house. Cooper Street, Woodbury, John Cooper. That house was right across the street from that statue near the Woodbury High School that has the World War I soldier marching. And he had his headquarters there. And they used the Friends Meeting House as a hospital for their wounded, and they also used the grounds there for burial for the people who died in their troops. Fast forward, about 30 years ago, a very sad occurrence. The city of Woodbury was growing, there was need for room, and lo and behold, the John Cooper house was razed and replaced by a parking lot for the bank there, right in the center of town. That historic building was razed to the ground, and only parts of it are, you can still see if you go to the Gloucester County Historical Society's museum and their research books area in the back. They have the mantle from the fireplace there, and it's got some saber holes in it and other things. But it's a shame that that ever happened, and we have to always stand on guard as citizens to watch out for this type of thing happening. We have to be willing to stand up and say things need to change. We can't let our historic history background be destroyed like this. As you know, there's an old saying, speaking truth to power. And one of the greatest documents that they exhibit that is the Declaration of Independence. When you get a chance, read it again, and you will find that that's exactly what it does. It speaks truth to the power. And sometimes we have to do that as citizens. We have to speak truth to the power. Our local leaders have to know that we will stand up and protect these sorts of things. Another one of the things I would like to leave with you before I finish here is, do you feel the same way I do that we should be teaching this local history that you heard about in our town? That should be part of the curriculum in our schools, at least in West Deptford schools? I agree with you. And believe it or not, I talked to Dr. Quint in Paulsboro the other day, and I asked him the same question. Do they teach about the fort there in Paulsboro? And he said, no, they don't have it in their curriculum. And I was surprised. I think we need to go to the Board of Education meeting sometime and go there as polite citizens and ask them to find out, is it in our curriculum here? And if not, why not? And if not, let's get it done. So I'd like to leave you with that thought, and keep in mind that whenever you're driving down some of these historic roads, that there were British troops there before you were there. So, by the way, there will be a test on all of this next Wednesday. That was false advertising that said a rain date next Wednesday. No, there's a test. So show up here, and I'm sure April will still have some exhibits for us. Again, thank you for attending.
Should have you for calculus. I only got a B. Next to March, a very familiar march, which you think has roots in Philadelphia. We're going to play the Liberty Bell March, which of course Sousa gave it its name while he was in Chicago. He was at an exhibition in Chicago, and as part of the show they dropped this big band that had a Liberty Bell on. His assistant said, hey, that's a great name for your new march. That's how the Liberty Bell March got its name. Next, probably my favorite piece to conduct, because it honors many of you. As we celebrate our country's 250th birthday, we remember those folks who made sacrifices on behalf of our freedom, and those folks who are still making sacrifices in the support of our freedom. We're going to play for you next music selection, medley written by a local gentleman, the late Bob Loudon from Edward. This is the Armed Forces Salute. We would be very honored if those of you who served, had relatives who served, or maybe have someone serving right now, would stand up and allow us to honor you as we play this Armed Forces Salute.